A state board of elections is insisting it has the power to block a sitting member of Congress from running for re-election. In a legal filing this week, the North Carolina Board of Elections says it can, if it chooses to, bar Republican Representative Madison Cawthorn from running for a second term. The board weighed in as part of an ongoing legal fight that began when liberal activists challenged Cawthorn's candidacy, saying he was unfit to run again based on the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment. That group is citing Cawthorn's actions in the lead up to January 6th. Now, I think the things Cawthorn has said, and I'll tell you about them in a minute, are shameful, but trying to disqualify him as a political candidate using a constitutional clause meant for Confederate officers returning from the Civil War? Beat him at the ballot box, not in the courtroom. The activists say tweets like this one are proof that Cawthorn aided and abetted the insurrection. Quote, January 6th is fast approaching. The future of this republic hinges on the actions of a solitary few. Get ready. The fate of a nation rests on your shoulders, yours and mine. Let's show Washington that our backbones are made of steel and titanium. It's time to fight. The morning of the 6th, Cawthorn revved up the crowd at the Save America rally, repeating false allegations that the presidential election was stolen hours before rioters stormed the Capitol.
But my friends, the Democrats, with all the fraud they have done in this election, the Republicans hiding and not fighting, they are trying to silence your voice.
Again, I think it's dangerous stuff. And yet, this is just not the way I think we ought to remove elected officials from office. But joining me now is Ron Fine, legal director of Free Speech for People, the group who filed the challenge to Cawthorn's candidacy. Thanks very much for joining us on the program. Appreciate it. All right, before we get into the legal side of this, what do you make of my practical argument that this is not the way we ought to go about trying to keep someone off the ballot?
Well, thanks, Dan, for that question. And may I say that our legal team, both at Free Speech for People, which is a national nonpartisan organization, and in North Carolina, which includes 2 retired justices of the state Supreme Court, including a Republican elected justice, as well as the Chief Justice, is very proud to represent a diverse group of North Carolina voters. And we don't even know their political affiliation, so I don't think many of them would be comfortable being characterized as liberal activists.
Oh, come on. Wait. Hang on. You guys clearly decided to put together a group, or whoever decided to put the group together, of people who would seem like it was bipartisan. But this is not a bipartisan effort here. I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, this is an effort by liberals, rightly or wrongly, we'll get to that in a minute, to keep them off the ballot. I mean, the notion that it's sort of like, oh, Republicans and Democrats are joining together in this effort, come on, that's not true.
Well, again, like I said, we've got a bipartisan or nonpartisan legal team that includes a former Republican justice of the state Supreme Court. So it's not really important what people's political leanings are, because we're trying to enforce a constitutional principle. Now, sometimes those constitutional principles might cut one way or the other. And it's important, like if we care about, let's say, freedom of religion in the First Amendment, that includes freedom of religion for people with your beliefs and people whose beliefs are very different from yours.
Absolutely.
But the 14th Amendment insurrectionist disqualification clause is another provision of the Constitution that's just as important. And in this case, the reason that provision was put into the Constitution, to address your earlier question, is there was a debate after the Civil War as to what to do with the ex-Confederate leadership that wanted to come back to Congress. And there was a faction that said, just let the voters, of Mississippi decide if they want to reelect Jefferson Davis. Let the voters of Georgia decide if Alexander Stephens, who was the vice president of the Confederacy, should return to Congress. There was a debate about that, but the Republican Congress decided and passed as a constitutional amendment that was then ratified by the states, a provision that said that these people who took an oath to support the Constitution, then broke that oath to aid and engage in an insurrection, are too dangerous, not just for the voters of their district, but for the entire country to ever be trusted with public office again.
All right, so let's talk about that from a legal perspective now. The definition of insurrection becomes critical here, right? He hasn't been charged with inciting an insurrection, right? And so it's sort of, the interpretation of the people filing this lawsuit that he was engaged in an insurrection. How do you overcome that?
So the question of whether someone engages in an insurrection is not just about the people, let's say, who stormed the Capitol. Just like in the Civil War, it wasn't just about the foot soldiers. And in fact, to go back to history, the Republican Congress that passed the 14th Amendment was actually much more concerned about the leadership than the foot soldiers. They actually weren't as much concerned about sort of an average Confederate, private.
Okay.
And they specifically wanted to exclude the leadership, many of whom had not fired a shot. Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, never bore arms in the Civil War.
Fair enough. But as a legal matter, though, where are you, what are you relying on to define what happened as a legal matter at the Capitol as an insurrection? Because that's a necessary requirement for you to be able to even, begin to have a chance in this lawsuit.
Absolutely. This has to be defined as an insurrection for this type of candidate challenge to go forward. And you can look at it one of two ways. One way you could look at it is to look at all the people who have said it's an insurrection. So those include, for example, Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate leader, who was, of course, a majority of the Senate leader.
But that's not going to get you there. That's not going to get you there as a legal matter.
You could look at Mr. Trump's defense lawyer in his impeachment trial, who said everyone agrees that it's an insurrection. But you could also look at it from what is the starting point of the legal definition of an insurrection. The historical definition in the 19th century and how courts define it now, which is a violent uprising that is intended to disrupt or overthrow the constituted government or the orderly transition of power. And that's what happened on January 6th.
Yep. Right. But the question becomes, again, what role did he play and what intent did he have with regard to the violent aspect of it? And I think that's where you may have a tougher legal argument to make. Final word on that?
Yeah, that is a critical question. And the legal definition of engaging in insurrection comes from a case in 1869, as it happens from the North Carolina Supreme Court, that said that engage in insurrection means to voluntarily aid in any way. And what we have with Madison Cawthorn is not just the tweets and the speech at the pre-attack demonstration that you showed earlier, but he actually told his followers to threaten their congressman. And then the organizers of the January 6th events reported that he and his team, along with those of a few other members of Congress, not the majority, but a few other members of Congress, actually worked with them to help plan some of those events.
Yeah. All right. Well, we shall see. Ron, fine. Good conversation. Thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.